The early days of Flash gaming were the wild west of independent development. No, that's not a unique observation, but it can't be overstated, with websites such as Newgrounds, Free Online Games, 2D Play, and so on and so forth leading the charge. There was a dead zone in my gaming history where my PS1 was basically kaput, but before I got my PS2, where I would get my fix of gaming with online Flash games. I would browse about a dozen sites daily and play whatever was new, and there were some great examples of free online Flash games, from Bowmaster Prelude to The Last Stand 2. The market is basically dead now because the gaming landscape has basically moved on, with most of the big names of early Flash gaming having developed their skills enough to make real games or have otherwise moved on. Newgrounds is still around, but they're pretty much the last haven for the wild west of gaming. Back in the day, one of my biggest go-to websites was called crazymonkeygames.com, which hasn't been updated since 2013, RIP. At the time, they had a selection of some of the most fun Flash games, like the addicting Adrenaline Rush, but one day I was browsing the website and a weirdly named game called Thing caught my eye, and through a combination of a cute exaggerated style, visceral gameplay, and excessive gore, I was hooked. That's the thing about Crazy Monkey Games. They were one of the few websites that tried to have recognizable series. The Thing series was developed by Sean McGee of Diseased Productions and consisted of Thing 1, 2, 3, and 4, as well as some spin-offs like the Arena series, plus the main character also appeared in some other games from the same website like Stinky Bean. Man, this is getting me all nostalgic. I hate it. The series followed our main character, who wasn't named Thing, but rather Project 154, a super weapon by a company called Systems Corp, which was made as a cloned super soldier with the physical resilience of an entire army. The specific term they used was hydrostatic shock. The entire series follows different parts of his journey. The first part follows our protagonist as he first gains self-awareness, breaks out of his holding cell, and finally the facility he was being held in, then to the city beyond. The second game probably has the least amount of story. It's just a series of levels with no dialogue or attempt to further the story as established in the first game. However, the context given in later games is that he's basically continuing his trek, trying in vain to get away from the company that's pursuing him, which takes him further and further away, even into the desert where you fight mummies apropos of nothing, which is tonally peculiar. Eventually you do get away and are able to go into hiding. 3 is where the story comes to the forefront and you actually start getting character interactions and dialogue. You're drawn out of hiding by a man claiming to be able to help you, but there's a massive plot hole here. 154 for no reason decides to come out of hiding to help this man who refuses to tell us what he wants or even who he is, even though it seemed he was safe in hiding, and as it turns out, the guy wants to kill us. Who'd have thunk it? Turns out he's Project number 153, your brother who's a good boy in the eyes of the corporate ladder, so he fights you and explodes comedically, then tricks you into a subterranean lair. You fight upwards and end up in a containment cell for the Hades prototype, but you end up trapped as the containment cell was reinforced with no way to get out. There's an introspective recap fit with 154 running on tar. And from there, you use the Hades prototype power source to blow a hole through the wall and escape with your only goal to be taking out the Systems Corp CEO, and only then can you end this madness. Yeah, not really. If you take out a CEO, there's about a dozen high-ranking executives who can take his place. The company will live on. Anyway, you fight through the facility you're in, take out 153, and go to the Systems Corp secret genetics lab. Fight to the top floor, only to find out that the CEO is nowhere to be seen. He gives this depressing speech about how you cost him millions, but he doesn't care because he could lose millions more and still turn a profit on you because he's already had to scrap many failed versions of you. You're not the first, nor will you be the last. So the only thing to do is try again. He pumps the room full of gas which disables your healing powers, sends a million guys after you, and in a nihilistic supposed to lose fight, the corporation wins. They take what remains of you back to the lab to try again and contact some buyers interested in the no doubt reformed version of you who is soon to be created. I was shocked by this outcome when I was 11 years old because it's such an out of left field nihilistic ending and I was so used to happy endings. With the message being that you can try all you want to fight against the power, but you'll never win or even make a dent in the powers that be, which is a depressing reflection on the world that we live in now. And that was the end of the Thing games as we knew them. I think for a Flash series, the story was surprisingly in-depth, and while the ride there wasn't anything special, maybe even a bit generic, the ending certainly sticks with you if nothing else. I think the most crazy thing about this is that according to the 4th game, this took place over the course of a few days. Imagine being trapped in a cell for your whole life, breaking free and killing thousands of people to try and live peacefully, only to find out that it was all in vain. Nihilism at its finest. Not really much to say beyond that. It's perfectly passable, but definitely a what did you expect for a free-to-play game situation. So the games are 2D run-and-gun shooters at heart. Right from the outset, you have the opportunity to customize your character, and one of the first things you see is Fedora, and I'm like, I'm having an idea. So, welcome to the adventures of Captain Fedora, who wears a black trench coat and nothing else. He was blessed by the god of neckbeards Meladius to use the powers of the friend zone to create a protective barrier around him that protects him from most damage, which is good because he has very thin skin. Playing the first game is surreal because it was initially released in 2005. I didn't get internet until 2006. This game literally came out before I had internet. crazy. You move along a 2D axis and shoot anything and everything in your way in excessively gory ways. The first game is basically a glorified demo because while it's the establishing point that the series jumps off from, it's only about 5 to 10 minutes long, and I've never understood the ending. After you beat the robot Poseidon, he appears at the end of the game, comes to life, charges at you, and then that's it, game over.
What?
The game ends, and then the second game picks up from there as if nothing happened. This ending has perplexed me for years. In any case, the first game is okay. You're given a very limited amount of ammo, and it's pretty tense, but even at its worst, it's still pretty easy to get through. I never died once while playing this game, and I played it like 4 times for this one video alone. Recoil aside, you can just click on the big heads of your enemies and they go down in a few hits. That's it. There are quite a few guns, but most of them aren't available unless you use the cheat that you can thankfully activate at any time, which gives you all the weapons. This game definitely suffers from first game syndrome, where the mechanics are all there, but they're super unrefined. The shooting has no weight because the enemies don't really react to being shot. They're just like walls that fall over once you load enough bullets into them. The recoil does add something to it, but some of the weapons have so much recoil as to be basically unusable. The blood and explosion effects are pitiful, and I discovered a design oversight where if you stand in the same spot as the enemies, they won't shoot you or even try to move to shoot you, which makes the elevator section rather trivial. Otherwise, you can shoot out the lights, which is pretty cool, damn near give yourself a seizure with the more powerful weapons. I like the juxtaposition of the simple bland graphics giving way for more colorful graphics once you step outside of the facility. I think the art style works for this game because it's supposed to be bland, but the refined style that the later games had was much better for being more defined. Otherwise, there's not a whole hell of a lot to talk about with this game. It was meant as an introductory demo to what would become the series, but it's so small that there's nothing to it. Poseidon is almost a borderline non-boss fight because it's so easy. His attacks are easy to avoid and he goes down in fewer hits than the amazing Sugar Glass Boxer. You move through a 5-minute facility, shooting everything in your way, and the shooting's not very good. There's nothing more to it than that. Thing 2 is where the game starts to really pick up. The visuals have been overhauled, and now the game looks more akin to what the series would look like from this point forward. More color, clearer defined edges, it's a little blocky and basic, but it has an appealingly simple style to it. The exaggerated character models contrast nicely against the more realistic worlds, and I particularly like the parallax scrolling. Once again, I was really surprised by how short this game is. You have 6 levels and a final boss, which means you can play this game front to back in about 18 minutes. There is an achievement system, which means that if you kill enough people in a level, you get upgraded weapons. So you get to have upgraded weapons as soon as you've proven you don't need them. The weapons in question are really cool, and they pack more of a punch than they ever did before, especially since the enemies react really well this time around, with recoil, locational damage, and explosive, more realistic gore. It's really quite satisfying. You have better, more varied weapons, better graphics, more satisfying content, but there's one real issue here. This game is just way too easy. None of the standard enemies have any sort of weapons, and they can only punch you, so if you keep moving and jumping, they can't hit you. Plus, your health regenerates, so there's almost no danger. You have a bunch of checkpoints where you need to kill a designated amount of enemies before you can pass, so you just need to wrangle them and back up slightly while firing into the innumerable crowds. They'll drop ammo, so the most danger you'll be in is by jumping into the crowd to grab the ammo, and some of your weapons will be one-hit kills, so it's just a super easy, almost mindless game. There is this one level that's pretty cool where you're falling and have to either avoid the falling enemies or kill them, and there's this giant blood splatter at the bottom of the fall which you just shrug off, communicating through gameplay alone that you're basically invincible, subtly implanting the question, what are you exactly? This game at the very least fixes the stand in one spot issue from the previous game because they only have melee, so the idea is that you have to be in the same spot. Occasionally you might get a power-up, which is a small pistol type weapon that will blow anybody away. If you hit them in the head, it's a one-hit kill and you only get 2 ammo per pickup, so if you jump into the air and fire at a crowd, then you're almost guaranteed to get at least 1 headshot. Otherwise you'll just blow their body parts away. I think this may have been a reference to the noisy cricket from Men in Black, but I don't know. It doesn't put you back to the weapon you had before, it always puts you back to the default submachine gun, which means you have to painstakingly scroll through your weapons to get back to the standard one, which is irritating in a pinch. Otherwise, the basic run and gun gameplay is functional and really fun for as short as the game is. The final boss, Zeus, rounds things off really nicely. He has a ton of health, kills you really easily, and you have a horde of people coming at you from both sides, so it's really hard. But if you can get him on the ground and stay in the air, he's not too bad. Otherwise, the extra modes like hard mode and extra content like the unlockables are pretty fun and add a splash of replayability, but if you're any good, you'll get everything within an hour. So overall, 2 feels like a much more complete game than the first game, but it still has a long way to go. Then in 3, we follow the adventures of Captain Fedora through another surprisingly short game. I beat it in only about 24 minutes, and had the keycard mission not taken so long, it probably would have been closer to 15 to 20 minutes. I guess these games are free, so it's not like I should really be complaining that much, but I do remember these games being much longer than they currently are now that I'm older. This game basically took the art style from the previous games, but refined the look, including adding more satisfying gore effects, more detailed gun effects, and general improved detail, details on the look of the environments, like these industrial areas look almost sci-fi with the general design. I really like how instead of just blowing away parts of people's bodies like ragdolls, they actually get blown apart. The big thing this time around is that Thing 3 is much harder than 1 and 2, and that's because enemies have been given their guns back from the first game, and it's much longer than the first game, which means that you have much more to survive against. Otherwise, the gameplay is fairly unchanged. You go through a series of levels, you cycle through several weapons that each take from a different pool of ammo, you unlock more weapons as you go through, and you make your way through these levels blasting the shit out of everything in your way. One thing I noticed is that the animations are kinda stiff. I think the animations look a little bit too pre-baked with no transitionary animations or reactionary animations, so it kinda looks and feels like your body isn't reacting to anything you're doing. Otherwise, it's just as visceral as it was before, except now with the graphics just getting better, it's only getting more satisfying to blow your load through hordes of people charging at you. Hold up, you look familiar. Huh. So that's why Devil May Cry 4 took so long. The shooting has more weight, the sound effects are really great, the primary gameplay loop is great, but I think the real issues arise with the RNG system. This game doesn't take into account how much health you have before spawning a health pickup. You could have 10% or 90%, it doesn't matter, so if you're running low on health, you could just be shit out of luck. Honestly, if the item spawn is attached to an RNG number, then I think the potential for a health pickup versus ammo pickup should be attached to an RNG spread that's based on your percentage of health, but I don't know how hard that would be to program. I'm no programmer. Another issue I have is the aforementioned keycard level, where you need to find a keycard in a really large open level, and because it's so open and everything looks the same, there's no way to tell where you've been or where you need to go, and if you're running around and can't find the keycard, it's only a matter of time before you die through 1,000 needles. The later levels are harder in theory because the enemies have more powerful guns, but normally you just need to make it to the end of the level, so you can just run past all these guys and get to the checkpoint, and that's that. But the combat is fun, so I'd always take time out of my busy schedule to fight some more mercenaries. In the game, I mean. This time there are two bosses, Project 153 and the Hades prototype. The former is super easy. He says that he is the perfect vehicle operator, and yet I just laid bullets into him and he went down like a little bitch. Why is that so funny? And the Hades prototype only took a bit long because the arena's big, your base speed isn't that much, and he only stays at the edges and not for too long, but if he stays long enough for you to be able to lay into him with any of your shotguns, he's dead as shit. Overall, this game was a vast improvement over the other two games in almost every way, but also has some other issues with difficulty balancing, and is surprisingly short, almost as short as 2. But the real cream of the crop is Thing 4. Once again, this game is shorter than I thought it would be, but this game is the best of all of the games in every way, including length, at about an hour of playtime. However, some of that is padding because the last two areas will fuck your shit up if you're not careful. This time Captain Fedora hasn't slept for days, so he's incredibly tired and his hair is a mess. You know, maybe if Systems Corp made a clone that looked like his waifu, he'd be more inclined to help them. The body pillow's getting rather crispy. The big change this time is that you can only hold 2 weapons at a time and you go through ammo like Skittles, and so this game encourages you to swap out at every turn, and there's an invisible counter at every locked passage that will open once you've killed enough enemies, and enemies now have designated spawn points, so the presentation is much less video gamey, and in general the presentation is 10 times better. Aside from the level layouts, which look much better with more detail and grit, so they look like dirty, disgusting facilities where unspeakable things happen, you also have next level gore. You can blow people into giblets, their various aspects remain after they die, and best of all, when you shoot them, blood is splattered on the wall behind them, and so by the end it feels like there's been a real lasting effect on the environment around you. Some guns go crazy with this as well. Anytime I used the Gauss shotgun, I wondered how there was any blood left over by the end of the fight at all. You could scrape the blood off these walls and have enough to transfuse into the entire population of Sweden. The combat feels more impactful, and they replaced your health meter with regenerating health like in your modern warfares and whatnot, so that makes big shootouts feel much more panicky as you can take much less punishment per second before dying. That combined with the limited weapon capacity makes the combat feel much more panicky and frantic, thereby making it feel much more exciting because you're constantly struggling to stay afloat. The weapons pack more of a punch than ever before with next level sound effects, recoil, and impact, and there are plenty of weapons, some even in secret compartments that you need to activate a switch to get to, and also some alternate paths near the end of the game. There are some issues, like how if you stand on the enemy spawn, just like before, they won't move and won't be able to shoot you, so if there's only one spawn point at present, you just need to press Q to pull out your melee weapon and beat people to death. In the supposed to lose fight at the end, there's only one spawn point, the leftmost wall, and if you stand at the edge of the arena, you can theoretically stay alive forever. I wish there was an alternate ending where if you kill like 1,000 enemies at the end part, you get to live and go into hiding forever or something. The panicky gameplay is really fun, but there are times where the limited health is a big drawback, especially in the penultimate area before the supposed to lose fight, where for some reason they decided to have a fight where the doors won't open unless you've killed roughly enough people to solve all world economic issues for the next 30 years. Where does Systems Corp get all this willing personnel, and more to the point, how do they sell the mission to them? Like, hey, we're gonna send you guys 3 at a time to take out an invincible super soldier. Good luck, assholes. There's gonna be some awkward conversations at the next Systems Corp Union meeting, I tell you what. I only survived because I discovered that you're basically invincible when you double jump. Beyond that, it just goes on, and I died a few times just through sheer attrition. From there you have two bosses. You fight the returning 153 in a helicopter, then you go on to fight the final version of Hades, and in all honesty, the first boss is probably the harder of the two, mostly because it's a glorified turret section. You shoot up at the engine while avoiding attacks, and sometimes these attacks are stacked in such a way that it takes you by surprise. It's just luck more than anything if you get blown to Kingdom Come or if you manage to destroy the helicopter and drive away forever. You go, Captain Fedora. You don't need anybody to tell you what to do. Take your questionable opinions on feminism and drive away forever. The second boss is pretty cool though, because it's a bait and switch. You think this big entrance is just for some random guy, only for him to sprout several mechanical limbs and start beating your ass like a heavy metal drum kit, but if you stay in the air, you'll be fine. Even if you run out of ammo and have to resort to using the lead pipe like me, you should be fine, and if you get damaged, be sure to back off and heal up. So this boss is probably the most complete boss in the series. So the combat is the most weighty and impactful in the series, the gore is the most visceral in this series by far, the graphics make way for the lasting effects on the environment to have more weight on you than ever before. Is there anything this game doesn't have compared to the others? Surprisingly, I found the frame rate to be an issue. Not in the game though. In some of the cutscenes, the frame rate tanked, and for some reason my computer was going crazy. I think this has to do with Adobe Flash being notoriously unoptimized, but it was only in some of the cutscenes, not all of them. But other than that, Thing 4 is easily the best in the series by a long shot. The presentation is miles ahead of the rest of the series, and the gameplay is the best this series has to offer. There's also the Thing Arena series, which are okay. They're just endless horde games where you can fight arrangements of enemies, from regular enemies to stinky beans to zombies to sentry bots. They were all made between the main series games, and as such they all feel like the most recent game to them. The first feels a lot like 2, 2 feels like 3, and 3 feels like 4. Of all of them, I feel that the second is the best because it has the most combat options. The weapons were really good and you could carry all of them simultaneously. The third was cool and had some good customization options, but you could only hold 2 weapons and you could only fight regular enemies. And 2 also has this great training mode where you can unlock the minigun by mowing down the cashier, which is the most blunt yet accurate depiction of a retail job I've ever seen. They're really just cutting out the middleman. And that was the Thing series, a little slice of my development as a gamer that now takes less than 2 hours to beat altogether. This series has a great gunplay system, probably the best free-to-play running gun series I can think of, especially in 4. They do blur the line between hardcore and casual game, and had they been longer and had slightly more depth, like maybe an upgrade system, I could see these being sold on Steam for a few bucks, but the series is pretty dead at this point, seeing as the last main core entry came out in 2008. They were encapsulations of Flash gaming at the time, needlessly gory, crude, and amateurish, but with a down-homey personalized charm. You could never have a major developer make anything like the Thing series. It's the type of thing that can only be made in the realms of amateur Flash development, and I'm sure that Sean McGee was happy with how big they became in the small circle of the internet that it occupied. So after this, whatever happened to our developer Sean McGee? Well, there's very little known about him. His website hasn't been updated since 2010, and his forums are completely gone, but I did a little digging and found that he'd been working on a game called Dashkin, along with a man by the name of Adam Phillips, but it was cancelled in 2015 due to a number of issues. The most recent post on the original page said that Sean was working at a game store full-time. At the very least, Dashkin was revived as Dashkin Dies at the end with a different developer, but that was further cancelled in 2018 due to a difference in vision between the developers. A sad end to a potentially great game, and who knows what Sean McGee is up to these days. He hasn't been heard from since 2015. Perhaps he's working on something huge. Who knows? There was actually one final Thing game in 2013, which is as yet the final game on crazymonkeygames.com. While it didn't appear on the Diseased Productions website, it was made and developed by Sean McGee. It has a great presentation and the best combat in the series with tons of weight to everything you did. But otherwise the series is dead, just like the majority of Flash development, which to somebody like me does feel like the end of an era, but I moved on many years ago as soon as I got back into more hardcore, for the lack of a better term, games. And these games aren't going anywhere. For those who are interested, I played these games using a standalone Flash player from the Adobe website and downloaded these games by going onto Page Info Media and saving the embedded SWF file and launching it from the Flash player. Perhaps you have some memories of old Flash games that you want to revisit. Well, there's no time like the present, and it's easier than ever to preserve and play your games. Rest in peace, Captain Fedora. Your collection of hentai was too good for this world. I will now petition Blizzard to put you into World of Warcraft. This video was brought to you in part by my lovely patrons. I thank you for your continued support. If you want to become a patron for TGX, the link is in the description.